When we think about math, we usually picture these perfect, clean shapes, right? Smooth circles, straight lines, these beautiful, elegant curves. But just look around you. Nature isn't like that at all. It's jagged, it's complicated, and honestly, it's a beautiful mess. So how in the world do we use the language of math to describe something as rugged as a coastline, or the way a blood vessel branches out, or even the shape of a cloud? Okay, let's get into it.
So for this explainer, our guide is a research paper called Review on Local and Non-Local Fractal Calculus. It's a really deep dive into the incredible mathematical tools that scientists and engineers have been developing to finally make sense of this wonderfully jagged world that's all around us.
And here's our game plan. First, we're going to figure out why traditional math just hits a wall with the real world. Then, we'll look at the 2 new toolkits mathematicians came up with to solve that very problem. After we see them in action with some really surprising materials, we'll zoom out and see why this new math is totally changing how we look at the universe. All right, first up, let's really set the stage. You can think of this as a story about a huge mismatch. A story about having old tools for a brand new kind of world we were trying to measure. The answer is that they're all fractals. They're built from these incredible patterns that just keep repeating themselves on smaller and smaller scales. I mean, if you zoom in on a single fern leaf, you'll see tinier shapes that look just like the whole thing. This idea, self-similarity, it's literally everywhere in nature, and it's what makes these shapes so beautifully complex. And right here, this is the heart of the problem. Standard calculus, it's an absolute genius for the smooth, predictable world on the left. But the moment you try to measure the length of a real fractal coastline, things get weird. The answer you get actually changes depending on how small your ruler is. The closer you look, the longer the coastline gets. It's wild. The old tools just completely break down on these jagged, complex shapes. So, what do you do when your trusty ruler just doesn't work anymore? Well, you invent a brand new one. And that's exactly where local fractal calculus enters the picture. It's a whole new set of rules designed specifically for these rough, intricate shapes. Now, the big idea behind this new ruler is something called the integral staircase function. Imagine you're trying to measure a path that's all broken up and full of gaps, kind of like a crumbling old staircase. A normal ruler? Totally useless. But this function, it's like it builds a custom staircase that perfectly fits the fractal's unique, jagged structure. And that lets us finally measure it properly. And hey, once you've got that custom ruler, you can start asking even cooler questions. Like, okay, but how steep is this jagged path? That's what the EFA derivative does. It uses that new staircase function as its guide to calculate a rate of change, or a slope, on a surface that is way, way too rough for the old tools of traditional calculus. So local calculus gave us a fantastic new ruler for static shapes. But a lot of systems in the real world aren't just frozen in time. Their past actually influences what they're doing right now. And to capture that, we need to upgrade our toolkit one more time by adding the incredible concept of memory. This slide just nails the difference. Local calculus is like taking a photograph. It perfectly captures a single, frozen moment. Non-local calculus, on the other hand, is like shooting a video. It takes into account the entire history that led up to that moment. And this ability to remember the past, it's an absolute game changer for modeling complex real-world systems. So how does this memory actually work? Well, one of the key tools is the Riemann-Liouville fat integral. I know, it sounds super complicated, but you can really think of it as a very sophisticated way of averaging things out. Instead of just looking at a function's value right this second, it looks back and weaves its behavior over its entire history into the calculation. It's totally essential for describing things that change based on what happened to them before. All right, so we've got our custom ruler, and we've got our video camera that has memory. That's all great in theory, but what can this new math actually do? Let's take a look at how it's being used to describe the world right now. The source paper we're looking at highlights 2 absolutely fantastic applications. First, understanding how materials like glass relax over time, and second, describing the really strange behavior of materials that are somehow part solid and part liquid. So let's start with viscoelasticity. I know, it's a mouthful. But really, this term just describes materials that are stuck somewhere between being a perfect solid and a perfect fluid. So think of something like silly putty, or maybe memory foam. They've got properties of both, and trying to model their behavior with standard equations is just incredibly complex. So how does fractal math help out? Well, it's basically a 3-step process.
First, scientists take those non-local fractal derivatives, the tools with memory, and they plug them right into the physical models. And this immediately bakes the material's history right into the equation. The result, you get a model that can finally describe, with stunning accuracy, how these weird and wonderful materials deform and flow over time.
And this quote from the paper just puts a perfect bow on it, showing how our two new toolkits work in tandem. That local parameter, alpha, it describes the material's actual physical, jagged structure. And at the same time, the non-local parameter, beta, it measures its memory, how much its past actions influence what it's doing right now. It's beautiful.
Okay, on to our second example, relaxation. Now, this is all about how certain materials, especially glassy or really disordered ones, slowly forget the stress that's been put on them. Like, if you bend a piece of plastic, it might slowly creep back to its original shape. That whole process is called relaxation.
Now, if you used standard calculus, you would predict a very simple exponential decay. That's what you see on the left. It's clean, it's predictable, but that's not what we actually see in a lot of real materials. Instead, we see this stretched exponential decay over on the right, and fractal calculus tells us why. When that fractal dimension alpha is less than 1, it's a huge clue that the material has a complex, messy internal structure, and that's what causes this much more complicated relaxation behavior. All right, we've gone pretty deep into the theory and the applications, so let's pull the camera back and really bring it all together. What does all of this mean? What's the single most important idea that we should walk away with after this whole explainer? Okay, here it is. Number 1, the world is fundamentally jagged, and our old mathematical language was built for a smooth one. Number 2, to fix that, we invented these incredible new toolkits, a local one that's like a custom ruler, and a non-local one that has memory. 3, this is not just abstract math for a whiteboard. It's being used today to solve real problems in physics and material science. And finally, it gives us a much richer, much more accurate language to describe the true, beautiful complexity of our universe. Which, of course, leaves us with one last, really fascinating question. You see, for centuries, we thought the book of nature was written in the language of standard calculus. But now we know that a lot of its chapters are actually written in the language of fractals. So as we get better and better at reading it, what other secrets of our universe is this new calculus going to unlock?